Hello everyone, my name is Caden K from Hide and Seek, and welcome to a brand new video. This case is going to be filled with a lot of information, a whole lot of information. So make sure you grab your snacks, grab some popcorn, whatever you need, get a blanket, get comfy, because today we are going into the case of Albert Fish, a child rapist and cannibal. Not the most too exciting things to be labeled upon yourself. But this is a very interesting one. It's actually currently raining right outside my window. I feel like it's only just adding to the eeriness of this case. It's very interesting, but again, lots of information, so buckle down, let's hop in. Albert Hamilton Fish was born on May 19th, 1870 in Washington, D.C. He had a mother, father, and had 3 older siblings. It's unclear if the time with his family was troubled, but it is known that when Albert's father died, he was placed into an orphanage by his mother. This is when most of his childhood trauma developed. From a young age, he suffered from mental illness like everyone else in his family. His uncle suffered from mania, his brother was confined in a mental hospital, and his sister Annie was diagnosed with, quote, mental affliction, end quote. When he was in the orphanage, it wasn't the most pleasing of environments to be in. Daily physical abuse was the most common thing to happen. Albert said that, quote, I was there till I was nearly 9, and that's where I got started wrong. We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys doing many things they should not have done, end quote. When he got beat, he actually began to enjoy the beatings. This is when his false perception on, sexual activities started to develop. Around 1879 was when his mother got a government job, which in turn made it possible for Albert to be taken care of by the mother. Sadly, the damage had already been done. Sexual desires and fantasies only increased at his young age. He would often go to public baths to watch the people around him strip. He even entered a homosexual relationship with a telegraph boy at the age of 12 years old. When he got older, he decided to go to New York, where he would then become a male prostitute. When he was a prostitute, he frequently raped young boys even after getting an arranged marriage. In 1898, he married a woman, and they eventually had 6 children. As time went on, he was eventually sentenced to incarceration in Sing Sing for embezzlement. Sex was a regular thing for him while he was in jail. When he was eventually released, he worked as a house painter and still continued to molest children. He preferred boys under the age of 6. Yeah. His introduction into kinkier sex was around 1910 with a boy named Thomas Caden, a 19-year-old. He was working in Willington, Delaware. He had a sadomasochist relationship with Thomas. Torture eventually was put on the table. He tied Thomas up and even tried to cut his penis in half. His intention was to kill him, but he eventually decided to not go through with it. His wife eventually, and honestly, understandably, left him in January of 1917. When his wife left him, his mental illness began to set in. He claimed to hear voices and even at one point wrapped himself in a carpet because John the Apostle told him to do it. It was about this time that Fish began to indulge in self-harm. He would embed needles into his groin and abdomen. X-rays showed that he had 29 needles lodged into his pelvis region. Self-harm somehow led to an obsession with cannibalism. He is said to have prepared dinners consisting of raw meat and would serve it to his children. Yeah, his wife left, and this dude still somehow managed to keep the kids. I don't know. Now is when his sexual desires and a mix of mental illness escalated his already concerning behaviors. In 1924, Fish discovered an 8-year-old Beatrice Keel playing alone. He convinced the girl to come closer by offering her money in exchange for some assistance. When the girl was approaching Fish, Keel's mother chased him away. He wasn't going to stop at one failed attempt. His psychosis had led him into believing that God was commanding him to torture and mutilate children. On May 25th, 1928, Edward Budd put a classified ad in the Sunday edition of the New York World that read, quote, young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street, end quote. On May 28th, 1928, Fish then visited the Budd family in Manhattan, New York, under the idea that he would be hiring Edward. He introduced himself as Frank Howard. When he arrived, Fish met Budd's younger sister, 10-year-old Grace. Fish promised to hire Bud and said he would send for him in a few days. On his second visit, he agreed to hire Bud, then convinced the parents to let Grace accompany him to a birthday party that evening at his sister's home. Fish left with Grace that day, but never came back. 7 years later, in November of 1934, the parents of Grace received a letter, and this letter is what led them to Albert Fish. The letter read like this: Dear Miss Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco for Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At this time, there was famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 per pound. So great was the suffering among the poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind was the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cutlet brought from the highest price. John said, sick, there is so long ago he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7 and one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First, he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest and of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his boiled, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At that time, I was living on 409 East 100th Street, near Right Side. He told me so often how good human flesh was. I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester and I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I choked her to death, then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my room, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not her though. I could have had, I wished. She died a virgin. This letter, obviously, was the most damning bit of evidence against Albert Fish. He was eventually captured after the delivery of the letter. The letter's envelope had an emblem on it with the letters NYPCBA, representing New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. Police questioned the company and found that the paper had been left behind by a janitor from the company at a rooming house he had been staying at. The same rooming house, a man named Albert Fish was renting the place. When the police learned that Fish had a strong resemblance to Frank Howard, Grace Budd's kidnapper, the police set up an interview. The police arrived at the home and took Fish in for questioning. He didn't hesitate when it came down to confessing. He never denied the murder of Grace Budd and even admitted that he meant to go out and kill her brother instead. It's claimed that he never attempted to rape the girl. But he told his lawyer that he involuntarily ejaculated twice while he was choking the girl. So this made the crime more out of sexual desire rather than just murder. Albert Fish also confessed to 2 other crimes: the death of 9-year-old Frances McDonald, which occurred on July 14, 1924, and 4-year-old Billy Gaffney, which occurred on February 11, 1927. The horrible acts against these children are just so vile and heinous that I simply just don't want to read them. It was already hard enough having to read Grace's. Understand that if you do want to look into it, it's out there. He went into vivid detail on what he did to each of these children, but I don't know. It just hits so differently when it's a 9-year-old and like just a 4-year-old child. Like I don't feel comfortable reading it. So again, if you're interested in it, it's out there, but for my sake, and probably for yours, I'm not going to go into it. I do apologize. On March 11th, 1935, his trial for the murder of Grace Budd began. The trial lasted 10 days. Fish pled insanity and claimed that God was telling him to kill children. Everyone on the jury felt that the electric chair is where he would spend his final moments of life. In January of 1936, shortly before he was executed, he was allowed to write a series of notes on his crimes to be handed over to journalists working on the case. His lawyer took a single look at those notes and refused to turn them over. Quote, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I've ever read." End quote. He was executed on January 16th, 1936 at 11:09 p.m. There was actually a rumor going around that Albert Fish kind of had like a bit of a sexual thrill when he was being executed. This is just a rumor though. I believe it has been dismissed. Something that like people believed is that like since his lasted longer, apparently, when he was being executed, that he must have gotten a kick out of it because the first time didn't work. When in actuality, when you look into his case, you figure out that the time in which it took to place him in the chair and then, to dispose of his body properly afterward kind of follows a bunch of other people when they're executed. So it seems like it was kind of like a one and done type thing. And this brings us to the end of Albert Fish. Really interesting, very interesting case. I loved looking into this, and I do want to thank the person that suggested it. I always am taking suggestions for cases, so if you want me to do a certain one, or you like maybe want me to look into one, I do have an Instagram. I'm gonna start like plugging it at the bottom, so if you want to message me more directly, you can, because there's a bunch of cases out there that I don't know about that I would love to look into. Like this guy, he was a loony, definitely a Looney Tune, but it all just came down from mental illness and just a poor upbringing. And it sucks. It's horrible to see that, people can have these types of things happen all just because of unfortunate events and just terrible upbringings. Doesn't excuse their actions in any way, shape, or form. It's just, it sucks to see, most definitely. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Caden Knighton of Hide and Seek. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, why not like and subscribe? It helps a brother out. I really do appreciate it. Maybe leave a comment. I think that'd be pretty cool. But if you didn't like the video, dislike it and leave a comment on what I can improve on. I'm always looking for constructive criticism. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of Albert Fish. I'll see y'all in the next one.